I've taken care of you long enough. Get out of my house. Those were the words my stepfather said to me on my 18th birthday. He kicked me out of a house that legally belonged to me. What hurt even more was when I called my mom immediately, hoping for support. But all she said was, "Brian's right. You need to grow up." They thought they were getting rid of a burden, me. But they didn't expect that just 1 week later, they would be packing up and leaving that house, including my dear mother. And then the opinions started rolling in. Some said I did the right thing. Others said I crossed a line, kicking my mother out of her home. So now I'm telling my story. You tell me, was I right or wrong for standing up and taking back what was mine? Hi everyone, I'm Thomas. I'm a freshman majoring in psychology at a small college in Northern California. Many people choose this field because they want to help others heal from pain. Me, I want to understand why some wounds don't bleed yet still leave a person aching for a lifetime. I'm not the kind of person who likes to dwell on the past. But if I had to name one moment that truly changed me, it would be my 18th birthday. There was nothing special about that day. The sky was clear, classes went on as usual, and I even got a few birthday texts from classmates. But sometimes, the days that seem the most ordinary shift your whole life. I'll never forget that birthday. Not because there was anything beautiful about it, but because from that moment on, I was no longer part of what I once called family. That was also the moment I started learning how to live like an adult. Not because I was old enough, but because there was no one left who called me son. I remember that afternoon like yesterday, my birthday almost 4 months ago. It was a milestone, the day I officially turned 18. That day, as I got off the bus near home, my mind wandered to something simple, like a tiny cake waiting on the kitchen counter, or a rushed little card with that familiar handwriting. "Happy birthday, my son." I wasn't hoping for a party or gifts, just something. A sign that someone remembered this day meant something to me. But the second I stepped through the front gate, those quiet little hopes were blown away. My stepfather, Brian, was already waiting on the porch. In his hand was my backpack, the left strap yanked out of shape like it had just been ripped off a hook. No hello, no questions, and definitely no happy birthday. He just dropped the bag on the tile floor and said, in a voice as dry as gravel, "I've taken care of you long enough. Get out of my house." I froze. For a few seconds, I couldn't say a word. My mouth opened, then closed again. My arms dropped to my sides, fingernails unconsciously digging into my sweaty palms. Then I stammered, You can't just throw me out. This is my mom's house. It's my house too." He smirked at that, just one corner of his mouth lifting like I told a joke. "Go ask your mom," he said, folding his arms. His voice went cold, even like steel. "You're 18. You're grown. That means you're on your own now. I don't owe you a damn thing." I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, each beat like a ticking clock counting down to the end of something. I grabbed the backpack strap, my throat tight. Mom won't go along with this. She'd never agree to this. And that's when I heard another voice from the second-floor balcony. A girl's voice, sharp, chewing gum loud enough to hear every sticky pop. "Oh really? You sure about that?" It was Casey, Brian's daughter from a previous marriage. She was leaning lazily on the railing, phone in hand, looking at me like another uninvited guest. She didn't stop there. She already agreed to it. "Don't believe me? Call her." Her words hit like a slap. One I'd seen coming for years but kept pretending wouldn't land. I clenched my fists tighter, trying to keep my voice steady. "You people don't have the right to kick me out." That's when Casey came down the steps and stood right before me. She pointed to my bag on the ground like it was trash. "If you forgot anything, better come back before tonight. That room's mine tomorrow." And before she turned to leave, she tossed one last line over her shoulder, wearing that smug, crooked smile. "Happy birthday, Thomas." I stood there for a long time, staring at that old backpack lying silent on the floor, like a cruel reminder. I didn't bend down. I didn't walk in. I just stood still, like if I waited long enough, maybe this would all be a bad dream. About 10 minutes later, standing still long enough to calm myself down, I pulled out my phone and called my mom. My hand trembled a little, but I hit the call button with purpose. Like if I had acted fast enough, maybe things wouldn't have the chance to get any worse. It rang 3 times before she picked up. Her voice came through steady, layered with the background noise of traffic. "I'm here. What's going on, Thomas?" I took a deep breath, eyes still fixed on the backpack lying at my feet. I said, voice shaking, "Mom, Brian just kicked me out of the house. On the other end, no gasp. No what? Like I'd hoped. Just a short silence. Then her reply came in that all too familiar tone. One I used to believe was gentle. I know. I froze. My chest tightened like my heart was pulled so hard it might tear loose. I asked her again. You know? And you didn't do anything? How could you let him do that to me? Even then, I still stupidly believed that she'd step in if she just heard it out loud. But no. She sighed, her voice dropping a level. Cold and detached. Thomas, you're 18 now. It's time for you to be independent. Brian's just doing what needs to be done. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sand. I pushed back. Independent? You call throwing me out like some unwanted thing being independent? She didn't answer right away. The silence stretched too long. And finally, like she just wanted to end the conversation, she said, Brian's right. You need to grow up. I went completely still. It hit me then, I wasn't frozen from shock anymore. I stood there because I couldn't believe I had ever trusted her. I tried one last time, voice low, still clinging to some hope she'd remember what today was. You know it's my birthday today, right? I heard a sharp breath. Then her reply. Flat, empty. Like an auto-reply text. Happy birthday. And then she hung up. I stared at the screen as it faded to black. And in that moment, something bitterly simple sank in. She had made her choice. Not the right thing. Not love. She chose the man she shared a bed with over the son she once swore she'd never abandon. And me, I was left standing there. Just me, a dusty backpack, and the last scraps of whatever illusion I had left about family. Right after the call with my mom ended, I stood on the porch longer, still clutching my phone, feeling strangely hollow. But then, like a last reflex when you have no one else left to trust, I called Uncle Robert, my dad's younger brother. We only saw each other a few times a year, but every time, he was the only one who looked at me without judgment. About 30 minutes later, his car pulled up in front of the house. The moment he saw me, he motioned for me to get in. Then he said, hang on a second, and pulled out his phone. Right then and there, Uncle Robert called my mom. I sat beside him, listening to the whole conversation. As soon as she picked up, he went straight to the point. Linda, I'm with Thomas. He called me and said Brian kicked him out of the house. What the hell is going on? Her voice came through the speaker. Cold. Clipped. This is my family's business. Stay out of it. Uncle Robert let out a short laugh. A dry, humorless sound. All right then. Consider this your missed chance to apologize to Thomas. I'll bet you anything, you'll leave that house within a week. At that moment, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Not because she was wrong, but because, finally, someone had the guts to say it out loud. Uncle Robert turned to me and looked me in the eye. He didn't ask a single question. He just said, calmly but firmly, let's go, kid. There's always room for you at my place. Around 7 that evening, I was sitting in Uncle Robert's house's warm, cozy dining room. The scent of chicken curry drifted gently from the kitchen. His wife, Aunt Helen, greeted me with her familiar smile and a handshake, gentle but firm in a way that felt oddly grounding. You've lost weight, Thomas, she said while pouring me a glass of water, glancing at Uncle. Nobody cooking properly for you, huh? I gave a half smile. I didn't say anything, but I didn't have to. A little later, their 2 daughters, Jenna and Ellie, came running downstairs, each clutching a stuffed animal. They looked up and asked, is Thomas staying, Mom? He can sleep in our room if he wants. We always sleep together anyway. He's a special guest tonight. I smiled, feeling a quiet warmth spread through me. I told them, I can sleep on the couch, it's fine. But Aunt Helen waved me off without hesitation. No need. No one in this house is just a guest. That night, I had dinner with a family that wasn't perfect, but somehow gave me a sense of safety I hadn't felt in years. Uncle Robert sat across from me, eating slowly. Then, out of nowhere, he set his chopsticks down and looked me straight. Thomas, there are a few things you need to know. About the house you used to live in. About what your grandfather left behind. I froze, spoon paused midair. What do you mean? He didn't answer right away. He just held my gaze, and something in his eyes grew heavier. Not yet, he said. Finish your dinner. But tonight, I need you to listen. Closer than you ever have. And that night, on my 18th birthday, I started to realize, some truths don't just hurt. They change everything you thought you knew about where you belong. About half an hour after dinner, Uncle Robert made me hot coffee. The aroma was soft and comforting, blending with the cozy air of the wooden house. I sat in the armchair by the window, still wearing my jacket. I wasn't used to the feeling of belonging just yet. Uncle Robert sat across from me, coffee in hand, his eyes suddenly more serious. For a moment, the room was so quiet I could hear the second hand ticking on the wall clock. He looked at me for a long while, then finally spoke, his voice slow and deliberate. Thomas, have you ever wondered why that house was already there when you were little? I hesitated. I just assumed it was Mom's, or something Dad left behind. Uncle Robert shook his head gently and set his cup on the glass table. No, that house originally belonged to your grandfather. At that, I looked up sharply, a tight feeling blooming in my chest, like my gut already knew what was coming. He didn't keep me waiting. Before he passed, your grandfather wrote a will. He left that house to you, Thomas Campbell. He sighed, then went on, voice low and steady, like he was dusting off pieces of the past. When your grandfather died, you were only 8. So, legally, temporary guardianship over the property was handed to your parents, with witnesses and notarized documents. There were no disputes. He paused, his eyes dimming a bit. But then, 2 years later, your dad passed away. The stroke happened so fast that there was no time for instructions. No time to update anything. From then on, your mother was the only adult left with access to the paperwork. I felt my heartbeat slow with every word. Uncle leaned forward, elbows resting, eyes fixed on the floor like he was watching old memories play out there. 2 years after your dad died, Brian showed up, and that's when everything began to shift. No one talked about the house anymore. No one said who it belonged to. And you just grew up in a house that carried your name, without ever knowing it was yours all along. I couldn't say anything after Uncle Robert finished telling me everything. No reaction, no frown, no follow-up questions. Just my hands. Gripping the chair's armrest so tightly the veins on the back of my hands stood out like they were reacting for the rest of me. I took a deep breath, but the smell of coffee was gone. All that remained was a bitter taste on my tongue. The kind of bitterness you don't recognize until you turn 18 and life finally lets you taste it for real. Then, Uncle Robert reached into the drawer of the coffee table and pulled out a thin folder, its pages yellowed with age. This is a copy of the will, he said. I kept one ever since your grandfather passed. You should have known all this sooner. But sometimes, people hide the truth, until the day you're old enough to have the right to know it. I took the folder from him, my hands still cold. My eyes landed on the bold line at the top of the first page. Thomas Campbell. And in that moment I knew, from this point on, nothing would ever be the same again. Right after that, the lights suddenly went out, and for a moment, I thought it was a power outage. I glanced around, confused. But then, from the kitchen, a tiny flicker began to glow. Soft at first, then growing brighter in the quiet stillness of the living room. Candlelight. And a second later, a voice rose, gentle, steady. Happy birthday to you. I froze in place, mouth slightly open, unable to say anything. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was Uncle Robert, Aunt Helen, and their 2 daughters, Jenna and Ellie. They stood around the table, looking at me with warm eyes and soft smiles. I had never felt that kind of care before. So simple, so quiet, yet it went straight to my core. Happy birthday, Thomas. Aunt Helen said it, her voice as warm as every welcome she'd ever given me. I just stood there. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should smile or cry. All I knew was that something in the air had changed. The cold was gone. That deep feeling of being unwanted, gone. We wanted to surprise you, Jenna said brightly. The youngest, her eyes wide and shining. Ellie, a little older, gently touched my shoulder and said, So now, you don't have to spend your birthday alone. At that moment, I could only stand still, eyes beginning to blur with something I couldn't quite name. A quiet joy rose in me, soft but overwhelming. For the first time in my life, I felt welcomed. Not because of what I could give or who I was supposed to be, but just because I was me. And that, to them, was enough. The following day, around 9 a.m., after we'd finished breakfast, Uncle Robert poured me another cup of coffee and said gently, It's time you met someone who can help you. He didn't explain further, just nodded toward the door, his eyes steady on mine, like he was saying, Today's a big step. We got in the car and drove to a small office inside an old, stately building in the city's heart. When we arrived, Uncle Robert led me down a long hallway before stopping in front of a door that read, Mr. Stevens, attorney at law. He knocked, and we stepped into the office when we were invited in. Behind a wooden desk sat Mr. Stevens, the lawyer who had drafted my grandfather's will. As soon as we walked in, he looked up and greeted us with a calm, professional smile. He was middle-aged, his face lined with time, but his eyes were sharp as if nothing ever got past him. Thomas, right? Roberts told me about you, he said, his voice warm, firm, and measured. Uncle Robert gestured for me to sit in the chair across from Mr. Stevens, then sat beside me. Go ahead and tell him everything, he said, keeping his eyes on me. So I did. I told him everything. From the moment I was thrown out of the house my grandfather left behind to what Uncle Robert had revealed about the will. Mr. Stevens listened quietly, never interrupting, occasionally jotting down notes in a small notebook. When I finished, he sat in silence for a moment. Then he adjusted his glasses and looked at me, serious but understanding. Thomas, I understand. Based on this will, the house is legally yours, he said confidently. You have every right to reclaim it. It's your rightful inheritance from your grandfather. A quiet surge of relief washed over me. So, I can ask them to leave right away? I asked, my voice a little shaky, needing the confirmation. Yes, he nodded firmly. You are the legal owner. If they refuse to leave, we can involve the police to enforce your ownership rights. But I recommend sending them an official notice first. If they still refuse, then we escalate. Hearing that, some of the tension inside me finally eased. But part of me still felt uneasy, unsure how they would react. What should I do next? I asked. He looked up at me slowly and deliberately. I'll go with you to the house. As your attorney, I'll protect your rights if there's any resistance or conflict. A deep breath escaped me. The weight I'd been carrying since yesterday started to lift. Thank you. I need the support. He gave a reassuring smile, stood up, and grabbed his leather briefcase from beneath the desk. That's what I'm here for. Let's go, Thomas. And just like that, with my attorney by my side, I felt ready to reclaim the home that was rightfully mine. No matter what my stepfather or even my mother had done, I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. An hour later, we stood in front of the house, the same house I'd been thrown out of just the day before. I paused at the gate, staring at it. The feeling was still strange, almost surreal. A swirl of confusion, disbelief, and something heavier that I couldn't quite name. One thought echoed in my mind. This is my house. But how did everything get so twisted? Right then, Uncle Robert turned to me, his voice firm. Are you ready for this? If they give you any trouble, I'll step in. I nodded, gripping the folder tighter. This wasn't just about property anymore. This was about reclaiming what was mine, and I wasn't going to let anyone stand in the way. We walked up to the front door. Uncle Robert knocked, firm but calm. Footsteps echoed from inside. Moments later, my mother and Brian appeared at the door. I could see the surprise in their eyes. My mom looked at me, confused, uncertain. But in that uncertainty, there was something else. Something that looked a lot like guilt. Thomas, what are you doing here? Her voice was tight, not exactly angry, not exactly happy either. I came home, I said, eyes locked on hers before shifting to Brian. I didn't owe them any more explanations. This was my house, and they had no right to keep it. Uncle Robert stood beside me, steady as a wall, his presence solid and unwavering. Then Mr. Stevens stepped forward. I'm Thomas's attorney, he said, calm but authoritative. According to the will left by Thomas's grandfather, this house legally belongs to Thomas. He has every right to be here and to take full possession of this property. As soon as the words left his mouth, my mom and Brian froze. Mom looked from Uncle Robert to me again as if struggling to process what she was hearing. But, this is our home, she said softly, her voice no longer certain. More like she was trying to convince herself. Not anymore, I said, voice steady. This is my home. You and Brian have no right to be here now. Immediately, Mr. Stevens turned to them, his voice cold and unwavering, leaving no room for negotiation. Per the will and Thomas's legal ownership, you no longer have any right to remain here. I'm asking you to vacate the premises now. As the words landed, my mother and Brian exchanged a look, anger and disbelief flashing across their faces. My mom turned to me, eyes sharp like sparks could shoot out at any second. Her voice cracked, furious. Thomas, are you out of your mind? This is my home. You can't throw your mother out. I stayed silent for a moment, locking eyes with her. And in that silence, something hardened in me. I wasn't that naive boy anymore. This is my home, I said, my voice like steel. You and Brian no longer have any right to be here. Please don't talk to me about raising or caring for me. I've had enough. Suddenly, Brian stormed toward me, face red with rage, his whole body wound tight like a spring about to snap. He pointed a shaking finger straight at my face, his voice low, seething. You don't get to throw us out, Thomas. Who the hell do you think you are? He took another step like he was ready to lunge, his expression twisted with fury. But I didn't back down. I stood my ground, stronger than I'd ever felt and like something deep inside had finally rooted itself. The second Brian moved closer, Uncle Robert stepped before me without hesitation, a wall between us. He stood firm, his voice sharp and commanding. Back off. Brian, don't you dare lay a hand on him. If you try anything, I'll have you charged with assault. Brian froze, chest heaving, surprised to be stopped. Uncle Robert didn't flinch or blink, just held his stare, ready for anything. Then Mom looked at me. Her face was tight with pain and disappointment, her voice trembling like she was reaching for anything that might sway me. You want to throw me out? After everything I've done for you? But I didn't waver. I looked her straight in the eye, no anger, hatred, just finality. I had made my choice. The tension in the room pressed in like heavy air. Their faces, furious, stunned, betrayed, searched mine for any sign of doubt. But there wasn't any, because I was done apologizing, done shrinking, done carrying guilt for simply claiming what was mine. They could glare, they could yell, but I wasn't going to break this time. Right after that, they slammed the door shut. But just before it closed, my mother threw out one last challenge. If you want to call the cops, go ahead. But Brian and I aren't going anywhere. The door shut with a loud, final thud, and I stood still, steady, knowing things were about to escalate. Still, I didn't hesitate. Determination rose like a tide, and I took the next step. 15 minutes later, the state police arrived. Mr. Stevens was already prepared. He laid out the facts clearly. My legal ownership of the house, backed by the will and verified documents. Every piece of paperwork had already been reviewed and confirmed. The officers listened carefully. Once Mr. Stevens was done, they knocked on the door and, after a brief discussion, requested that my mother and Brian vacate the premises immediately. After checking records, they confirmed there was no rental agreement. The house belonged to me. My mother had only been my guardian until I turned 18. And now that I was legally an adult, I had every right to ask them to leave. But one of the officers gently offered a suggestion. Thomas, I understand your rights, but I'd recommend giving them a few days to find a new place to stay. A quiet heat flared inside me. Not because I lacked empathy, but because I was tired of everyone trying to smooth things over while I'd been pushed out. What about yesterday? I asked, voice cold. I have proof that Brian threw me out, before I was even legally an adult. I pulled out my phone and showed them the video, captured clearly by the front porch security camera. There it was, time-stamped, Brian yanking my bag and tossing it out at precisely 3 p.m. The day before. Suddenly, Mr. Stevens froze, then quickly reached into his briefcase. He flipped through my documents, eyes scanning fast, and then they lit up with realization. Thomas was born at 5 p.m. on December 15th, he said, loud and clear. That means at 3 p.m. yesterday, he was still a minor. The room felt like it paused. The officers exchanged glances. My mom's face paled. Even Brian looked rattled. One of the officers turned to me, then slowly nodded, understanding precisely what that meant. That changes everything, the officer said, his voice suddenly firm. Yesterday, when they kicked you out, you were still legally underage, which means their actions were illegal. Right after that, Mr. Stevens pulled me and Uncle Robert aside. His voice was low but firm and clear. Thomas, do you want to take this all the way? Press charges, fight for full compensation? The law's on your side. Inside, I was torn. Part of me wanted to go all in. Make them pay, show them I wasn't someone they could toss aside. But another part hesitated. As much as I resented everything that happened, my mom was still, technically, family. and I wasn't sure I had it to crush her entirely. I let out a long breath. In the end, I made a choice. I would take the house back and I would make them leave today. But I wouldn't push it further than that. Not for now. Their things will be packed and placed outside in 3 days, I said. They can come get them then. But I don't want them showing up here again. Uncle Robert looked at me for a long second, then nodded slowly, like he understood every unspoken word behind my decision. I felt a heavy knot still sitting in my chest, but at least now, I was in control. After we regrouped, Mr. Stephen stepped forward with his usual calm but commanding tone. We won't be pressing charges for now, he said clearly, but you are required to vacate this house immediately. He paused, then added, if you don't comply, we will file a formal lawsuit, and the penalties and restitution will not be minor. As soon as he finished, my mother spoke up. Her voice cracked, like something she'd been holding back suddenly slipped out. Thomas, please, can't you let Brian and me stay? We were wrong. I know we were. I'm begging you. For a second, something in me tensed. Part of me still wanted to care, to ease up. But then yesterday flashed back. Her silence while Brian threw me out. She chose him over me. And now she wanted mercy? Too late, I said, voice unwavering. You agreed when he kicked me out. You let it happen. You didn't protect me. And now, I'm protecting myself. She didn't respond. Her eyes dropped, filled with sadness, maybe even shame. But no more words came out. There was nothing left to say. The scene before me was beyond repair, and I was done letting emotions cloud what was rightfully mine. A strange mix of relief and quiet vindication rose inside me. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid anymore. Just then, Casey, Brian's daughter, came home, and the moment she found out what was happening, she exploded. Who do you think you are, kicking my dad out of this house? You have no right to do this, Thomas. Her voice cut through the air, sharp, furious, insulting and challenging. You heartless bastard. You're throwing my dad out over some stupid house? Do you even know everything he's done for you? I stood still. The fury in me rose, thick in my throat. But I said nothing. I just looked at her, steady and silent, fighting to hold on to my calm. No matter how badly I wanted to shout back. That's when Mr. Stephen stepped forward, his voice low but cutting, his tone brooking no argument. Casey, I'm going to need you to stop right now. He pointed to the security camera mounted on the wall. His eyes locked onto hers, cold and unwavering. You should remember that everything you do here is being recorded. I'm warning you. Do not insult or threaten Thomas again. Casey froze. She understood the weight behind his words, even if the fire in her hadn't entirely died. Her throat tightened, and she hissed through her teeth. You'll regret this, Thomas. But Mr. Stevens didn't flinch. He took a single step closer, voice unshaken. Leave now, Casey, or I will call for immediate legal intervention. The standoff stretched for a few more seconds, thick with tension. But in the end, there was nothing left for them to say. My mom, Brian, and Casey had lost, and they knew it. The police stepped in again, firm and final. They were told to leave the property immediately. As they gathered their things in silence, one of the officers turned back to face them. His tone was stern and heavy with warning. If any of you attempt to harm Thomas or trespass on this property again, the law will step in, and next time, the consequences will be severe. He paused, eyes locked on my mother and Brian, ensuring his words landed. You might have gotten a warning today. You won't get one next time. With that, my mom, Brian, and Casey said nothing more. They turned and walked away, silent, bitter, and defeated. And I stood there, still. I'm still processing it all. But inside me, something had finally shifted. A sense of victory and release. As I'd finally stepped out of a cage I didn't even know I'd been living in. Realizing she couldn't stay in the house any longer, my mother looked at me, eyes filled with disappointment, and spoke in a quiet, pleading voice. Thomas, please, just give me 1 hour. That's all I ask. Let me pack what I need. I'll leave right after. I stood silently for a moment, my heart weighed down like a stone. A part of me wanted to give her that grace, to offer one last chance at dignity. But another part was exhausted. I was exhausted from late apologies, broken promises, and the silence that had cost me so much. Finally, I let out a long breath, looked her straight in the eyes and said, Fine, you have 1 hour. but I'll be here the entire time. You pack under my supervision, Uncle Robert and Mr. Stevens. She nodded slowly, her expression still clouded with sorrow and resignation. She didn't say another word. Uncle Robert stood beside me, eyes firm and steady as he looked at her. Calm but with no room for negotiation. And Mr. Stevens gave a short, clear nod, his quiet way of confirming that we were watching and that this wasn't going to slip out of control again. During that hour, my mother and Brian crept around the house, silently packing their belongings. I didn't look at them much, but from the rushed, nervous way they moved, it was clear. They knew they no longer had anything to hold on to. A mix of bitter satisfaction and deep ache stirred inside me. This was the price of their selfishness, the consequence of choosing power and pride over love and truth. Uncle Robert and Mr. Stevens stayed alert the entire time, their eyes scanning every movement. Nothing went unnoticed. Not a single item was allowed to be taken without being seen and accounted for. They made sure nothing of value, financial or legal, would accidentally disappear. Finally, when the hour was up, I turned to my mother and said calmly, "That's enough. Your things have been packed. Whatever you didn't get to today, I'll leave outside the gate in 3 days. You can come pick it up then." She said nothing, didn't argue, didn't plead. She just lowered her head and walked out the door, with Brian and Casey silently trailing behind her. No drama, no final words, just the sound of a door closing behind people who had once called this place theirs. And me, I'm still standing there, still breathing, still holding on to the fact that, finally, I had taken my home back. It's been 4 months now, and the house, my house, is finally under my name. Though tense and full of obstacles, the legal process ended exactly how I hoped it would. I can say, with quiet confidence, that I've reclaimed what's mine. Not just the property, but my freedom, my peace, the right to exist in a space that feels safe and genuinely mine. In these past 4 months, they haven't come back. My mother and Brian disappeared without a word, no apology, no attempt to reconcile. All communication stopped, and to be honest, I haven't missed it. Life without them has been good. The first few days were strange. The silence in the house was almost too still. No arguments, no tension, no walking on eggshells. But little by little, I realized that silence was peace. That emptiness was freedom. This life without them was the one I needed all along. Not because I hate them, not because I wished them harm, but because I finally understood. I don't have to tolerate manipulation. I don't have to accept lies. I don't have to carry the weight of toxic relationships just because they're family. I've been able to live honestly, to breathe freely, and that's worth more than anything they ever withheld from me. Most importantly, I know now that I did the right thing. For too long, I gave pieces of myself away, trying to earn the love that came with conditions, trying to please people who never really saw me, and in the process I lost myself. But not anymore. Now I've reclaimed ownership not just of a house but of my life, of my voice, of who I am. So to anyone reading this, to those of you stuck in the same kind of situation, feeling used, silenced, or controlled by people you once called family, I want to tell you this. If you're standing at that crossroads, torn between your head and your heart, between cutting ties or clinging to the hope they'll change, choose you. Do what's right for your future, even if it's hard, even if it hurts. Because once you take that step, once you fight for yourself, you'll realize something powerful. You were never the problem. You were never asking for too much. You were trying to live freely, and you deserve that. Don't be afraid to make the hard choice. Sometimes the most significant shifts in life start with the smallest acts of courage. And always remember this. No one can take your life away from you, unless you let them. And before I end this story, I want to ask you, my dear audience, was I right or wrong for making my mother leave the house that legally belonged to me? If you think I was right, comment 1. If you think I was wrong, comment 2. And more importantly, share your thoughts. Please tell me how you see it, because I genuinely want to hear your perspective. If the story moved you in any way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to us. It keeps us going, helping us bring more real stories, hard lessons, and moments that speak to the heart. Thank you for watching, listening, and standing with me through every part of this journey. If you think this story could help someone who feels stuck, who needs strength, please share it. Let's keep learning, growing, and getting stronger together.